My first episode was an Olympic athlete. Like long form video editing is definitely a challenge of mine.
How do you reach out to those higher profile guests to have them on your podcast? Hi, and welcome to this new episode of my podcast debut, where I interview people who are in the early stages of launching their podcast. And Sim, thank you for joining. Hopefully, our conversation will give to listeners and viewers today the inspiration, the motivation, the knowledge also to get started with their own podcast to get the results that they want from it. So, thanks, Sim, for joining. And I'd love to ask you, have you ever been invited on another podcast?
No, first of all, thanks Alex for having me. This is a really great new experience for me. Um, I'm normally on the other end, hosting my own podcast, The Monday Motion, as you know. But I've never been invited, so this is a good new experience and I'm excited to get started.
Amazing. So, Sim, you've just started a podcast, and so you're a podcast host, and that's your first, let's say, conversation or interview as a guest. So, yeah, thank you for joining. Congratulations. And also, I'd love to ask you, how do you feel?
Yeah, I feel pretty great about it. As you mentioned, it's a fairly new podcast, started about 6 months ago. I've had a blessed experience starting out, just being able to interview some of the people that I've been able to speak with, of all walks of life. I've interviewed um, NBA skill development coach Drew Hanlon, which was my biggest guest to date. Blessed to be able to say that. I've worked with Samantha Ramsdell, who's a comedian out here in the U.S. Um, and it's been a great ride. So I'm feeling pretty great, and I'm excited to continue and keep going.
Amazing. And so, what is your podcast about?
Yeah. So like I previously mentioned, it's called the Monday Motion. The reason I call it the Monday Motion is because there's a motivational aspect to it, where I like to help people get a new outlook on starting their week. Um, it's a slang term out here in the US. We say, "What's the motion?" And that's kind of just saying like, what are we doing today? Like, kind of what are we feeling today?
Mm.
So I put the words together, the Monday Motion, to give people a new outlook on starting a new week. And the reason it started was because specifically I was in sport management in college, and I was like I mentioned, a or skill development coach, which is why I had Drew Hanlon on as a guest. I worked with basketball teams, um, of all levels in college, and a bunch of different players, and it wasn't the most lucrative thing. I was really, it was really rewarding in that I got to watch people develop and grow, but it really wasn't the most lucrative thing. Um,
Mm.
and honestly, it wasn't really sustainable for me to continue to go down that path. So what I did was I took some of the same skills that I learned in coaching, learning how to speak and learning how to network with different people, and I applied it to something new. And that's where the Monday Motion podcast came from, where I give business and entrepreneurship advice, um, with my guests and myself, to these athletes who's already the audience that I have. So I took what I already built in the coaching world and kind of made that flip and adjusted, and now we talk more on the business side of things. So any athlete out there that is either professional or in college and they're looking to supplement their income with different resources, that's what we talk about. So um, long story short, that's kind of what it is and what I look to do on my podcast.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Sim. And so,
Mhm.
what's your goal with this podcast?
Yeah, my goal is to just share. It's always just a bit, just to share real information, real insightful information that's backed by facts. I don't like to share anything that it would be misleading to my audience. So, like I said, I'm blessed to be in the position to where I've interviewed some really successful people, and those people have helped me kind of get a real insight on what it means to be at that level. Either starting your own business or starting a successful brand at that level. Um, and those are the stories that I like to share. Is people are
Mm.
people that you might not have, you might not have counted for doing great things in their life, and they were able to build and grow, and either have millions of followers on social media, or I met somebody that did their first Olympic trial run. They qualified for the Olympics for the first time, and that was my first episode. His name was Salif Mane. It's really just success stories. That's kind of like what I like to share. And then what are actionable steps that you can take from that person to be able to apply to your own life.
I love that. Thanks, Sim.
Mhm.
And
Of course.
what I'm hearing is also thanks to this podcast, you've connected with all these amazing people, right? And some that have a big business, big brands. And what comes to me first is that podcasting is such an amazing networking tool, and I'm sure you
Yes.
agree with that. When I speak with people who haven't started their podcast, sometimes they wonder, oh, who will want to be on my show. But what I tell them is, in general, people love to be interviewed, and you can actually go to much higher profiles. And of course, if you go to like Tony Robbins or I don't know some super high profile, they'll say no. But you would be surprised how high status, let's say, you can go, even if you don't have a huge audience, even if you're still starting. Was that your experience?
Yeah, for sure. Uh, to be honest with you, 4 months in, I landed Drew Handlin, the NBA skills coach. My first episode was an Olympic athlete. Like I never expected, um, to be, I just did earlier today. I filmed the episode with Samantha Ramsdell, who's got 3 million followers on TikTok. And I'm not saying these things to flex in a sense or show off in a sense. I'm saying these things to let people know that this podcasting thing is really useful for the reason that you said, for networking and being able to meet new people that might be in a better position than you are, and then you take those experiences and you apply certain things that could fit into your own life, and just improve your overall self too. It's a journey for the networking reason, and it's a journey for just the self improvement. And I love every part of it.
Amazing. Yeah.
Mhm.
And how do you reach out to those higher profile guests to have them on your podcast?
So, funny story. I actually came up with this concept. Uh, I call them quote unquote home runs, like like you hear in a baseball game. Um, everybody kind of bats at a certain average, but every once in a while, I like to, maybe once a week, maybe once a month, I like to take what's called a home run and just go reach out to somebody that I don't think would ever reach back to me. Um, and it's a calculated thing too. I'm not just going to reach out to some, you know, A-list celebrity that's got their page blocked, or they have moderators on their social media and things like that. What I am looking to do, however, is connect the dots and see, all right, who have I already interviewed? Can I get can I get a reference from them to somebody else that might be at their same level? So I'm reaching out to those people, and sometimes it still doesn't work out, but when it does, um, when it does, then I'm able to connect the dots and even go further and continue to get those higher level guests. And that's something that um, I take as a tool, is just take the occasional home run. It's, calculate it when you can, kind of connect the dots where you can, and you'll be surprised what can happen.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. I love that strategy. I mean, obviously, as you grow, you can just reach out to people and they know your podcast, especially if you're known in a certain niche. So that helps. That's what I have, for example, with my other podcast, the Light Leaders. In some communities, like let's say the raw vegan community, I start to have a bit of a name, so it's easier for me to reach out to people, and they just go like, yeah, sure. But I love the idea of of the network where you like. I would definitely not encourage anyone to have someone on their podcast just to be connected. I think everyone I have on my
That's true.
podcast, I definitely want to have them, but you can definitely be strategic around, oh, I also know then or that person that I really want to have on the podcast, and then I always leave a bit of time after the podcast and to ask some questions and leverage the relationship and the network. And part of it can be, hey, can you connect me with that person? I know you guys are friends and you couldn't answer my
Mhm.
message.
Right. And that's really important too. Like you don't do it just to do it. Um, be prepared. That's first and foremost. You got to be prepared and ask them questions about what they're doing. Because if you don't know anything about what they're doing and you have them on, it's a failure. And now you look bad. So like it's that game of being prepared. And when that opportunity arises, then you're
Mm,
already then you're already a step ahead. And once you do the podcast, then you just put yourself in better standing because now not only did you get that good guest on, but you did a good job. You did your homework, and now you look reputable for the next person that you have on. So that's really important too.
yeah. Yeah, I love that. Doing the homework definitely helps. I know personally I don't prepare much my episodes, but I think first is
Right.
because in general I want to have on my podcast people I'm already really interested in and I've been following them. So I actually already know the conversation I want to have with them. And then I don't need to research. Or sometimes I just
Right.
approach it more really out of curiosity and even putting myself in the shoes of the viewer. I think, oh, that's probably a more beginner approach that can resonate with them. So it depends a little bit. I don't think you have to over prepare, but ultimately it's like depends on your style. I think it depends on people. I know some
Hmm.
podcast hosts, and it's like their signature is that they're gonna know a lot of things about the guest, and that's really cool too.
Right. And yeah, I totally agree, Alex. It does depend on your style. And I want to make very clear too, like on my podcast, I don't do a whole lot of I don't script anything because as you know, like when you hop on and you have a real conversation like we're having right now, um, it flows a lot better. You have really, really great talking points and it's like we're having a conversation as opposed to being robotic. Um, and it and like I do my research on it. Like if I have a like a high level guest or something like that, I'll every once in a while, get some information about what they're currently doing so that I don't seem like I don't know anything. But at the same time, like yeah, the scripting, the stuff like that, the more you can get rid of that and just kind of flow on a very loose structure, I think the more successful your podcast can be. So I totally agree there.
Mm. Thank you, Sim. So, for example, for this interview, I had a checklist to prepare. That's when I asked you a few things or briefed you a little bit. And then I have a
Hmm.
few like usual questions that I have in front of me. So if I feel, okay, nothing's flowing in the conversation, I can go to something like typical question that I have like, what has been your main challenge with the podcast or something like this. I could go to that. And then I have a notebook where I write down just a word here and there. So, for example, I wrote reach out, and that's when I asked you about how you reach out, and now I have network plus. So that's the benefits of networking. So I just make notes when you speak, and then
Hmm.
I don't need to interrupt you. I don't need to keep it in my head. But then when you finish, then I have my note, and then I can go to the next question. I have also a little reminder to promote this podcast. So, for example, if I use it right now, I'll tell the viewer, "Thank you so much for tuning in here." And I'm actually having people who are in the process of starting their podcast on the show, whether you have just started like Sim or whether it's just an
Hmm.
idea. My idea with this podcast is come on the show and we can talk about it. And so you can receive coaching from me, but also share about your idea in the process, try the tools, start speaking online. So if you want to be on the show, just check the link in the description and we can organize an interview like I'm doing now with Sim. And Sim, back to our conversation.
Hmm.
I'd love to ask you, yeah, based on that note here that says Network Plus. in my head, the question that I had from that is how did how has this networking from the podcast benefited you so far?
Yeah. So I learned this one quote later on in life. I'm not gonna lie, when I came out of college, like I told you, I was at university. I graduated. I went further to go get my master's. In the US, the job market at the time that I got out of that I got out of college wasn't the greatest. Um, and there was a lot of really valuable points that I learned after college that I quite honestly learned, wish that I learned while I was there because it made me a better person. It made me more resilient. One of those things being a coach that did an interview for a college basketball team. He said, make 5 connections and connect the dots in between them. So in doing that, if I make 5 connections in different areas, but they're all semi-related, and I can connect the dots in between them and kind of make them mesh, I have essentially, I'm essentially without even thinking about it doing network marketing and like starting kind of the structure of a business in a way, because I'm able to say that, what some of the things that I do, I was able to get some partnerships going for my social media. One of them being my cousin's athletic brand called the Fit Traveler. I have, codes and stuff like that if you want to buy, if you want to go ahead and buy any of the athletic apparel that she sells. Another thing that I do is I work with a website design and digital marketing company to sell their services. So completely different realm of things, but it kind of covers um, you know, all of the different levels of my podcast with the athletic, the athletic mindset. So pushing towards the athletes with the digital marketing. I'm catering towards somebody that might be starting up, looking to improve their digital marketing. So entrepreneur. Um, or a business that's just looking to rebrand or something along those lines. So I was able to take the connections that, um, in completely different fields and, kind of mesh them all and brand my podcast through those different things. And that's kind of how I've been able to start to monetize at an early stage because I'm taking things that are related to my podcast, but I'm in different businesses at the same time. And,
Mm,
um, so that's kind of my take. Right now, like I said, I'm in the very early stages of all of this. So early on, it was a bit messy, and I was just kind of getting into things just to try them. But now I'm starting to focus in a little bit more and take products and services that really relate to my podcast that I can go ahead and promote.
that's very good. Yeah, thank you. So when we talk about monetization of a podcast, many people will start thinking, oh, is YouTube or Spotify paying you? And you can go there, but you need really big amounts. So usually a very
Huge
smart idea
following.
when you get started are things like network marketing or MLMs, affiliates, or your own offer. Like if you're a coach, for example, and you're coaching people, and that's what I do with this podcast. Even it's a lead generation strategy also for my coaching business. And so these are all things that you can really benefit from and getting clients, making money through commissions from the very beginning, from day zero with zero subscribers. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, totally agree. And I think this is a really cool idea that you got going on here, Alex. Like coaching kind of in the middle of the podcast. So you're kind of like showing your services a little bit on and what you do. And then if people want to go ahead and go further in your coaching, it all applies, but you give them like little nuggets as we go along, which I think is really cool.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you, Sim. Thank you. I actually
you're welcome.
started this podcast because I was not taking my own advice for monetization with my other podcast, which is my bigger brand called The Light Leaders. And with this
Hmm.
one, I just want to keep it as a passion project. I'm just honest. I want to interview who I want, when I want, on the topic I want. And I don't want to niche myself too much. But this is not ideal for making money. This is not that ideal for business because
Right.
it's better for business to have more of a niche and an audience and understand their pain and how you can help them and all this. So that's why I didn't want to sacrifice my lifelong work of creating that podcast, and that opens so many doors. And for the other podcast, I kind of almost have an intention for each podcast. Maybe one podcast I really want to connect with that person. Maybe another podcast I know is going to get a lot of views with my audience. Maybe another podcast is I don't know, I just had an intuition or something, and I do it, so it's super fun. And so I can have different intentions for each. But for this one, it's to support people who want to start a podcast or to grow and monetize a podcast. And so it's a very specific audience, and I have an offer linked to that. So I think it can be really cool to have a podcast as a passion project also. And I think it should be always, it's not so black and white. It should probably be a mix of two. You always want to have the energy of something you're passionate about. But depending on your situation, sometimes a lot of people I have on this podcast, they, they they come and they're like, "Oh no, I don't really care about monetization. Want to do I just want to do what I'm passionate about," and that's very important for sure. But what often happens is then they never prioritize it. Like, even they don't either they don't start or then they stop after 5 episodes because life is life and they got a child and they need to pay the bills and so if you
Yeah.
don't have a very good outcome for yourself also and that's clear from it and you keep it as a hobby, depending on your life circumstances it might be deprioritized more easily.
Right. And you make a really good point of, a lot of people don't, a lot of for those reasons, a lot of people don't look to monetize, which is totally fine. And a benefit that if you're not looking to monetize, a benefit that I see in it, if you can, if you can take the time to do a podcast, is um, just having something to offer a high value guest, or even if even if you, aside from the money, like even if you're talking to, like, you're, say, a philosopher, and you see a guy that's a doctorate level person that you really value a lot of what they write, um, at least giving yourself the chance to be like, okay, I have this podcast. um, even if you don't monetize it, just say, I have this podcast, let's get on, let's do an episode and let's see where it goes. Just having that to be able to say to somebody, it gives them a reason to do a project with you. And then from there, you never know where it can go. So that's kind of one of the biggest things I've learned in doing this, and being a part of the process.
I love that, Sim. I think that there's kind of a different levels of intentionality where you could be like, okay, I'm going to do that podcast and I want 5 leads from it, or I want to make commissions from the product. And it's like very clear. And then you could do
Hmm.
just like, okay, let's have fun and see. But in between, you could be like, okay, I'm gonna interview these few people in my next podcast, and I don't know, I don't have like a very specific goal. I need to make that amount of money, but I know this is opening doors that are gonna help a lot whatever I'm doing. So one of my clients, for example, he's doing that. He's a high performance business consultant, and so for him, being connected to CEOs of big companies, he can't know exactly if he's going to make money or not, and he can't start a invite on the podcast thinking I'm going to make that from that podcast, but he knows he's getting connected to someone who would probably not have said yes if he said like, hey, I'm a consultant and I'd love to have a chat with you, or to have a 1 hour conversation with you. So it's really good to open those doors. And so you can have, my point is like, you can be intentional without being like super clear, super strict, but knowing that it opened doors also, as you should.
Right. Totally agree. Totally agree.
Thanks, Sim. And I'd love to ask you also, either what has been your biggest challenge since you started, or what is right now.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think me being in the early stages of my podcast, a lot of people don't, you know, they don't account for, and what I didn't account for was some of the things that I don't have an expertise in, um, being something that I need to delegate to somebody else, the cost in that. So that's what, that's one of the biggest challenges that I feel like a lot of people have in starting a podcast or starting any sort of brand company is starting out, there's certain skills that I don't have that I need to delegate to somebody else in order for it to be a quality product. Um, right now, I'm lucky enough to to have somebody help me out with long form video editing, which is the thing that I struggle to do. And my brand and my strength is being able to network. It's being a host. It's being somebody that's personable, and likes to have conversations. So when you talk to me about anything tech related, or anything like that, that's not my strong suit. But I wanted to make this podcast happen, and I was lucky enough to have, I don't like using the word luck. I was fortunate enough to have somebody that was going to help me out with the editing side of things. But I know that situation isn't isn't a long term situation. So I have to continue to grow
Mm,
in order to make episodes happen, so that I can allocate certain money towards towards that person, towards an editor. And even further, if I continue to go and the podcast continues to grow, then now I might have a third and a fourth person come on, just continue to grow my team. Early stages, that's been one of the challenges that has definitely been present, but I'm actively working on that. And I'm going to continue to put episodes out, any possible way that I can. That's kind of how it is when it starts out, is what kind of whatever way you can get it done. If you really want to do it, you're going to find a way.
yeah.
But long form video editing is definitely a challenge of mine, and that's something that I'm looking to constantly improve.
Thank you, Sim. And I think that speaks to probably a huge majority of the people who watch right now. They have the gift, the
Hmm.
medicine for the world. They want to talk about it and do the conversations. And then ideally not have much to do with the equipment and the tech, and these are things that more come in the way. Actually, that's why with my coaching, for example, for people who can invest more, I created a more done for you offer, because I know ideally for people who can afford it, it's nice to just like record the podcast, have a great conversation, and then see it published and see the clips being published, having all of that in the background, but focusing on your genius, which is you sharing your voice, sharing your message, or having conversations with these people, and networking. So that's something I think that's people will really relate to. And then at the same time, also have an offer where I train people to do it. And part of why I launched that is because thanks to softwares like Riverside, I feel like the editing, both for the long form and for the creation of clips, for example, has been really, really reduced. I've been in the podcast game for 7 years. And what I can do now with Riverside, I used to pay a VA, $1,000 a month to do these kind of things that take
Right.
very little time. Like for example, with this episode, I even pushed it even more, where like 30 to 45 minutes after we finish, it's going to be posted on YouTube, and we'll have a
Hmm.
clip. And because I don't know if you use it,
Right.
but there's like that workflow on Riverside where I click a button and it adds the intro and the outro and does the branding. And so then there's like very
Wow.
little adjustments to do. And I mean, for me,
Okay.
I don't recommend also people to edit the podcast much. I don't use on Riverside remove silence and filler words, because when people listen to long form, I feel they want to feel the authenticity of the conversation. So usually the edit for me, the first 5 seconds where there's a blank when I started recording, and the last 5 seconds before I press stop record, and then in the middle it's like with the workflow, and it's pretty
Right.
straightforward. I'm curious, yeah, what has been your experience using Riverside for the edits of the podcast?
Yeah. I use some other tools, namely. the person that I have helping me out, I believe uses Adobe and a couple other tools as well. Myself, I do a lot of the short form editing, so I use a lot of CapCut. I use a lot of Opus Clip, AI tools when I can, when it looks clean. Um, those are the tools that I use. I think short form video editing has gotten so much easier, like just with the tools that, like you mentioned, some of the functions on Riverside that I didn't even know about that I'm going to start looking into now. Thank you for that. But I think also on the short form side of things, it's gotten significantly easier because instead of clipping every single part of the podcast and adding captions and taking the hours that it takes to do that. Now you have an AI generated, a generative AI tool that's gonna come up with the words for you. And if it ever makes a mistake, you go in and you fix that mistake really quickly, and then you're done with that short. It takes significantly shorter time, and it's like you mentioned, it is really crazy what you're able to do nowadays, which is quite honestly part of the reason why I started this as well, is just the ease of use. It's gotten really, you know really easy to do a lot of these different things, and it kind of motivated me to say, like, okay, if I can't click a button, then I'm then I'm doing something wrong, because it's gotten a lot easier. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, yeah. Have a look because obviously there's some limitations. So if you're the area of a CEO, you're not going to use the editing from Riverside. You have a big team and you want to do like super cool stuff. But have a look at the episodes when I publish in like 45 minutes or so, and you can see, oh, is that something I'd be happy with? Because this is like super easy and it's all done within Riverside. So that's what they created, is kind of that one-stop shop. And then of course, if people want to go like create, like it depend, if you have a certain size already and a certain money you can invest, you can put much more time into creating amazing thumbnail, creating like better SEO for the YouTube videos, creating epic edits. Usually the hook is the first thing to look at, like the first minute. For example, if you look at big podcasts like Diary of a CEO, they really work on that kind of first minute also. And then obviously on Instagram, having epic b-rolls and b- super good hooks for your clips. So I have
Right.
I have a client investing close to $20,000 a month on podcasting because he wants to go big, and we use also other agencies, so you could have an agency for all of these things. So you can go, but basically, generally, my recommendation is um, yeah, using Riverside for, like, if you want to keep it like simple and easy, and then when you're ready to scale, starting for most people, they don't like to do it, so it's going to be hiring an agency, hiring people to go to the next level from what you can do. Yeah, from Riverside. And the people who love to geek and create video animation and use Adobe and stuff, good on them, but I think it's such a huge minority of the people who will be watching this.
Right. Right. That's a that's a great point. It's just starting out. Don't overwhelm yourself.
Mm.
Do something simple. Uh, you don't have to invest $20,000 a month, but unless you're at that level. But be strategic and make it look. Put time into it, make it look good. But there are ways around. Um, A, spending that much money, and B, uh, putting in a ridiculous amount of time that you might not have to allocate towards that in your current life. So, I think podcasting is a great tool, especially with today's world when you're able to get things done so quickly, and it's definitely awesome for branding and marketing.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Sim. And for people watching this, I'd say with the systems I'm using, with Riverside, with also like you've been in it, Sim, like with the pre-interview, like Calendly, pre-interview form, checklist, automated post-production and clips, and this, I usually 3 hours a week you can post weekly for people. So I want to tell the viewer that's all you need, and then of course you can go to the next level. And again, if you think, well, that's awesome, I actually have the time to start a podcast, reach out to me. Either come as a guest on the show, or you can reach out privately if you don't want to be a guest too. But basically, it's like if you want to be trained to do it, you can be trained to do it like 3 hours, 3 hours a week, and you can have a weekly podcast that's pretty good, like really pretty good quality. And then for the people who have more budget and want to go bigger, there's like done for you, and then you start like working with me or agencies and people who do it for you. That's kind of what I generally recommend. Any other main challenge you have faced or you're facing?
Um, no, I think that the way that I have my podcast set up and the help that I'm able to get right now, um, it's been pretty smooth for the most part, other than the tech side of things for me personally. Um, there were certain technical issues with when I was figuring out the microphone, and I'm going to be, making an investment to get a webcam to make my video quality even better if I can. Um, Things like that are a challenge early on. That I'm slowly able to improve the bigger investment that I'm able to make through the podcast. So um, early on, yes, those were challenges, but I'm slowly starting to improve on those things. And excuse me, and as I improve and I'm able to invest in better equipment and like I said, potentially a bigger team, then the podcast just grows with it. So yeah.
Thank you. That's a really good point. Sim, on the equipment, it's actually quite similar. What I recommend for people when they start is to keep it really simple. So even now, I'm just on iPhone 15 without a mic.
Right.
That's just the mic of the iPhone 15. And so basically,
Hmm.
I had it already. So there's almost no extra investment. Or if so, that would be the investment in something like this. And that makes me things more simple. But then, of course, when you start to want to go bigger, I actually used to have a studio with editing team and 3 cameras. Just didn't make as much sense for me financially. And my experience has been that the most important is the quality of the content, and having a high production is a cherry on the cake. It's not going to build the audience. And my top episodes, there's online recordings. As long as it's good enough, it's pretty good. You don't want it to be crappy. But then the difference between like an okay mic and the best mic on the market is gonna be relevant only if you already have like quite a big podcast. Did you align with that?
Right. Yeah, yeah, for sure. I would say, like I said, don't go outside of your means by any mean. You can get these things done without going outside of your means. One thing I would add to that too is like I have a video podcast, but even though I have a video podcast, people are more inclined to want to listen to what I'm saying as opposed to looking at the screen. Like I know people that turn the video on YouTube, let it play. They're not watching it. They're in the car on the way home. They're just listening to it. So what's more important, you know, being given that information, what's more important is the sound. So anytime you can invest in the sound, I feel like that's a good investment. Um, again, staying within your means. Uh, video and things of that nature can come later, but as long as people can hear you, that's
Mm.
number one. Because um, I think that's what, like you can sit here and watch us in a room, uh, or sit there, watch a video of us in a room, but what's more important is the message that we're getting across. So anytime they can hear us, and hear us clearly, I think that's more of what your money should be going into if you have any money to spend into it.
Very good point. I fully agree. I
Mhm.
definitely think it's worth doing video because then you can post on YouTube, you can do clips. So my general advice is to do video. But if you have
Mhm.
to choose between your video podcast being with an amazing video and a crappy sound, or a crappy video and an amazing sound, definitely go for the crappy video and the amazing sound. Like no brainer. So
For
thanks for
sure.
sharing that. Scene.
For sure. Hmm. Thousand
Amazing.
percent. Hmm. Anything else you got for me?
Now we've gone for 40 minutes. Actually, it's when we have those cool conversations. That's something people realize
Hmm.
also when they start hosting podcasts, that time is different when you're having a podcast. It goes
Yeah.
much faster. But yeah, I'd
Yeah.
just love to conclude now and ask you, like, also, was this valuable for you to have this conversation? Like, do you have
Say that one more
take
time.
was this valuable, and do you have takeaways also from
Yeah.
this conversation?
Yeah, of course, 1,000%. I have some takeaways myself, just in the just in the fact that we use a lot of the same software, and I'm going to continue to play with it and mess around and see what new functions I can use. I think that part of it was really valuable for me personally. I think whatever stage you're at, there's always something that you can learn. Um, that's rule number one. I think that no matter what the topic is, if you're talking to somebody, no matter what stage they're at, you can always learn something from somebody, and that's something that I learned here today. It's definitely um, a valuable thing for me to um, work on the editing side of things on my own, even though I want to delegate a lot of that responsibility. So that's something that I took away from this that I'll definitely
Mm.
that I'll definitely go ahead and continue to work on.
Thank you, Sim. Yeah, that's cool. Yes, my
For
experience
sure.
is sometimes delegation actually takes more time. Like it depends. There's like
Right.
a threshold where it makes sense. But yeah, and Riverside, they're like they're releasing new updates every month. I mean, not just them, even their competitors like Descript and CapCut. Like it's changing so fast. Also, it's pretty cool. They keep having new improvements and new features. So yeah, definitely play with that. But yeah, I'm glad it was, and also many of the things you shared around like finding a guest and monetizing and all the things. I think they were really interesting to me, and I'm sure would be very valuable to the people who watch this episode. So yeah,
For
thank you
sure.
so much, Sim.
Yeah,
And
thank
thank
you.
you to everyone
If you
who
wouldn't,
watched. Come have a conversation. And Sim, yeah, do you have a last word for me or the viewer?
yeah, if any, last thing I wanted to leave you with is if anybody, I know my target audience is athletics, but if anybody wants to watch my podcast as well, the Monday Motion, all entrepreneurship and business related skills, high level business related skills, and even mindset stuff is in there. I think that kind of gets swept under the rug a lot of the times when you hear a business based podcast, they're always talking about money. Um, I think that you have to change your mindset as well. So that's a lot of what I talk about on my podcast. And if anybody would be interested in anything more on more along the lines of that, come join me over at the Monday Motion. Thank you for having me on, Alex. This podcast's ideas is awesome, and this has been really great.
Thank you so much, Sim. And yeah, it's really good that you know your audience, and I love your angle also with the business, but also for athletes. I think it's a very
Hmm.
strong positioning, and that's actually quite important. Often people get blocked by equipment and video quality, but like positioning, knowing your audience are things that are actually more important, and then the content also. So thank you, Sim. Thank you,
Right.
everyone, and have a
Of
beautiful day.
course.